My name is Eleanor, I'm 38, and my sister sent me a text telling me not to come for Christmas because they only wanted close family. What she didn't know was that I had just inherited a $40 million estate. Before I tell you about the 47 missed calls and the dinner party that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The text message arrived on a crisp Tuesday afternoon in early December. I was standing in the cavernous marble entryway of Windmere Estate, the magnificent coastal property that had, until 3 weeks ago, belonged to my mentor, my friend, and the only person who ever truly saw me, Margaret Hamilton. The phone buzzed in the pocket of my coat, a tiny, angry insect in the echoing silence of the grand house. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was from my younger sister, Vanessa. Hey Ellie. Just a heads up, don't come for Christmas this year. We're keeping it small, just close family. I read the words once, then twice. Just close family. The phrase felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My gaze drifted up the sweeping staircase to the portrait of Margaret that hung above the grand fireplace. Her eyes, captured in oil paint, seemed to hold a familiar mixture of wisdom and wry amusement. She was the one who had felt like family, more so than anyone who shared my blood. A cold, hard clarity began to wash over me, a sudden frost that extinguished the smoldering grief I'd carried since her funeral. My thumbs moved over the screen, typing a simple, two-word reply. No problem. I added a cheerful little have fun, for good measure, the kind of polite dismissal they had perfected on me for years. Then I powered the phone off completely. I didn't know it in that exact moment, but that simple act of digital silence was the first shot fired in a war I didn't even know I was ready to fight. It was the first step in taking back my life. What Vanessa didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Margaret, in her infinite and surprising wisdom, had left me everything. The $18 million estate I was standing in, a $15 million investment portfolio that secured my future beyond my wildest dreams, an art collection worth a fortune, and properties in 3 other states. My phone was off, but the clock on their comfortable, entitled, and blissfully ignorant lives had just started ticking down. To understand why that text message was not just an insult but an act of war, you have to understand the ecosystem of my family. It was a solar system with one bright, shining sun, Vanessa. I was a distant, dependable planet, useful for my gravitational pull but never worthy of a closer look. I was the responsible one. The quiet, bookish older sister who got good grades, paid her own bills, and never caused a fuss. Vanessa was the star, the vivacious, beautiful one who could charm her way out of any trouble and for whom the rules never seemed to apply. Our entire childhood was a masterclass in this quiet, soul-crushing inequity. I remember one Thanksgiving when I was 17. I had just received a letter of early acceptance to my first-choice university, along with a significant scholarship. I was bursting with pride. I waited until dinner, thinking it was the perfect moment to share my news. Just as I was about to speak, Vanessa, then 15, announced she had been voted homecoming princess. The table erupted. My parents were beaming, calling for champagne to celebrate. My own news, when I finally managed to mention it, was met with a distracted, "Oh, that's nice, dear. We always knew you were the smart one." My promotion to a life of quiet responsibility was complete. This pattern didn't just continue into adulthood, it intensified. I put myself through college and then business school, clawing my way up the corporate ladder to become a respected international business consultant. My salary was impressive, but my expenses were even more so, thanks to my family. Vanessa coasted on her looks and charm, bouncing between low-effort marketing jobs. When she inevitably maxed out her credit cards on designer bags and spa days, it was my phone that rang. "Ellie, I'm in a real bind," she'd whine, and like a fool, I'd transfer the money. I paid off her debts 3 separate times. The biggest drain was her husband, Andrew. A man whose ambition was only outmatched by his incompetence. He fancied himself an entrepreneur. His last brilliant idea was a line of artisanal, gluten-free dog biscuits. He convinced me to invest, promising I'd double my money in a year. I gave him $50,000, money I had earmarked for a down payment on my own apartment. The business folded in 6 months. The money was gone. When I expressed my frustration, my father took me aside. "Eleanor, he's family," he'd said, his voice laced with disappointment in me. "Sometimes family needs a hand up. You're in a position to help." The implication was clear: my success wasn't for me, it was a resource for them. The loan for their house down payment, which I knew was a gift the moment I wrote the check, was just the final nail in that coffin. The one sanctuary in my life was Margaret Hamilton. I met her when I was a junior consultant assigned to her company's portfolio. She was a titan, a woman who had built a global empire from nothing. She was brilliant, demanding, and saw through everyone's nonsense. And for some reason, she saw me. She saw past the quiet, accommodating shell to the sharp, analytical mind beneath. She took me under her wing, first as a protégé, then as a partner. We traveled the world, closing deals, building something real. She was the mother I never had, the mentor who celebrated every promotion, every victory, with a bottle of her best champagne. "Never let them underestimate you, Eleanor," she'd often say, her eyes twinkling. "Especially the ones who are supposed to love you the most." She knew. She saw it all. My own family dismissed my career. "Oh, you're off to China again? How nice," my mother would say, her tone suggesting I was going on a vacation instead of a grueling 10-day business trip. They never asked about my work, my accomplishments. My life was a foreign country to them, one they had no interest in visiting. Then, 3 weeks ago, my world imploded. Margaret, who had seemed indestructible, had a massive, sudden heart attack and was gone. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. Her lawyer, Richard Caldwell, a kind, sharp-as-a-tack man I'd known for years, called me for the reading of the will. I went, expecting she'd left me a sentimental keepsake, maybe a first edition from her library. I was not prepared for the reality. We sat in his polished wood office, the air thick with the scent of old books and fresh grief. "Eleanor," Richard said, his voice gentle. "Margaret loved you very much. She considered you the daughter she never had." He paused, then pushed a thick document across the desk. "She has left the entirety of her estate to you." I couldn't speak. The words didn't compute. He walked me through it: the estate, the stocks, the bonds, the art, the properties. A dizzying, life-altering sum that totaled close to $40 million. It felt like a dream, a mistake. After the meeting, I drove to Windermere. I needed to be in her space, to feel her presence. I moved into one of the guest suites, telling no one. I needed time. Time to mourn Margaret, time to process this seismic shift in my reality, without the inevitable circus my family would create. My initial, foolish plan was to get through the holidays, to find my footing, and then, in the new year, I would invite them. I pictured their faces, the shock, the awe. I imagined that this, finally, would be the thing that earned me their respect. I thought money could buy what love never had. Vanessa's text message incinerated that fantasy. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a statement of fact, a line drawn in the sand. "You are not close family." Standing in that marble hall, the silence of the house was no longer peaceful. It was a void, a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed 38 years of suppressed anger. The grief for Margaret was still there, a deep, aching wound, but now it had a new and powerful companion, a cold, crystalline resolve. My hand was perfectly steady as I picked up my phone and dialed. Not my sister, not my parents. I called the one person I knew I could trust. "Richard," I said when he answered, my voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "It's Eleanor Winters. I need to see you as soon as possible. It's about my will. I want to make some changes. Immediately." Richard's office felt different this time. The first time, I was a grieving beneficiary. This time, I was a client with a mission. He listened patiently, his steepled fingers resting on his chin, as I laid out my plan. He didn't interrupt. "I want to rewrite my will," I stated, my voice leaving no room for argument. "From top to bottom." "Eleanor, are you certain?" he asked, his tone careful, that of a lawyer fulfilling his duty. "You're still processing a significant loss. Major financial decisions, especially those concerning inheritance and family, are often best made with a clearer head." "I have never been clearer in my entire life, Richard," I replied, leaning forward slightly. "This isn't a decision born from grief. It's a decision born from 38 years of data. The results are in. It's time to act on them." That seemed to satisfy him. He picked up a pen. "All right. Tell me what you want to do." I detailed the new terms with the precision of a business proposal. First, a trust fund for my niece, Emma. She was the only one who ever broke ranks, the only one who would send me texts out of the blue asking how I was, or telling me about a book she'd read. The trust would be ironclad, covering her entire college fund and providing a substantial sum to start her life, but with one critical, non-negotiable condition: the funds would be administered by a third-party trustee and would only be accessible to her directly. Her parents, Vanessa and Andrew, would have no access and no control. Furthermore, the trust would be contingent on her maintaining a direct, independent relationship with me. It was a firewall, designed to protect her from her parents' greed. "Next, Mrs. Chin. I want to set aside a sum for her," I told Richard. "Enough to buy a home, enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life, enough to bring her family from China to visit whenever she wants." She had cared for Margaret for 20 years, and in the past few weeks, had cared for me with a quiet, maternal grace my own mother had never shown. The bulk of Margaret's priceless art collection, the Monets, the Degas, would be donated to the City Museum to establish a new public wing in her name. "And for your sister, Vanessa?" Richard prompted, his pen hovering over the legal pad. I took a slow, deliberate breath. $1,000, I said. "Payable by check." For the first time, a small smile touched Richard's lips. "I see." He made the note. "There is one more thing I strongly recommend," he said, shifting from legal scribe to trusted strategist. "Given the emotional nature of these changes, and the significant sums involved, it's possible your family might try to challenge this down the line. They could try to argue you weren't in your right mind, that you were acting out of grief." "Let them try," I said. "We won't give them the chance," he countered. "I'm going to book you an appointment with Dr. Alistair Finch. He's the top forensic psychiatrist in the state. He'll perform a full competency evaluation. We'll have it videotaped, documented, signed, and dated on the exact same day you sign the new will. We will build a legal fortress around your decisions so high and so thick that no one will ever be able to breach it." A wave of profound gratitude washed over me. This was why Margaret had trusted him implicitly. He didn't just execute instructions, he anticipated the battle and fortified the defenses. "Book it," I said. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The session with Dr. Finch was surprisingly cathartic. I laid out the decades of financial and emotional exploitation with the dispassionate clarity of a case study. He listened, asked probing questions, and at the end, he looked at me over his glasses. "Ms. Winters," he said, "you are not only exceptionally sound of mind, you possess a degree of emotional resilience that is, frankly, remarkable." Signing the new will felt like a physical release. The heavy cloak of familial obligation, of unreciprocated duty, simply evaporated from my shoulders. I walked out of Richard's office feeling lighter than I had in years. The grief for Margaret was still there, but it was no longer a weight. It was a legacy. And I was finally ready to honor it. But the plan wasn't complete. It wasn't enough to simply disinherit them. That was a private act. Their cruelty had been personal, but constant. The final insult, the Christmas text, was a public declaration of my worthlessness to them. They needed a public demonstration of what, exactly, they had thrown away. They needed to see me, really see me, in my new world. A world they were no longer invited to enter. My next call was to Patricia Montgomery. Patricia was a force of nature, a retired ambassador who moved through the city's elite circles with the grace of a panther and the strategic mind of a chess grandmaster. "Patricia, darling," I said, a smile in my voice for the first time in weeks. "I'm having a small, intimate pre-Christmas gathering at Windmere. I'd be honored if you would come." "Eleanor." I was so worried. "Of course, I'll be there." "What's the occasion?" "Let's call it a housewarming," I said. "And a toast to new beginnings." Patricia, ever perceptive, caught the steel beneath the velvet. "Darling," she purred, "I wouldn't miss it for the world. And I'll be sure to bring my new phone. The camera is simply divine." The night of the party, Windmere was no longer a silent, grieving house. It was alive. Mrs. Chen, who seemed to approve of my newfound fire, had arranged tasteful, elegant decorations. White flowers, flickering candles, and a magnificent fire roaring in the hearth. I chose my armor carefully, a simple, floor-length silk gown in a deep sapphire blue that brought out the color of my eyes. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the tired, overlooked older sister. I saw the mistress of the estate. I saw Margaret's successor. I felt powerful. The evening was everything I had hoped for. My small group of guests, Patricia, Richard and his wife, and a charming, handsome art dealer I'd recently met named Harold Bennett, were the perfect company. We drank vintage champagne from Margaret's cellar and talked about art, politics, and travel. It was a conversation of equals. Harold, in particular, was a revelation. He listened when I spoke, asked intelligent questions about my work, and looked at me with an admiration that had nothing to do with my bank account. True to her word, Patricia was the perfect co-conspirator. She moved through the evening, phone in hand, discreetly snapping photos. A candid shot of me laughing with Harold by the fireplace. A group photo of us raising our glasses in the magnificent dining room. A beautifully composed shot of the art on the walls. She uploaded them to her widely followed Instagram account, tagging the location. Her caption was a masterpiece of casual elegance, a magical evening celebrating new beginnings with dear friends at the breathtaking Windmere estate. "Eleanor, you are glowing." I didn't look at my phone for the rest of the night. I didn't have to. The fuse had been lit. The trap had been set. Now, all I had to do was wait. I slept that night like I hadn't slept in years, a deep, dreamless, untroubled sleep. The next morning, I woke to the gentle winter sun streaming through the bay windows of my master suite. I felt a profound sense of peace. I made a pot of coffee and took it out onto the stone terrace overlooking the churning Atlantic. I breathed in the cold, salty air and felt free. It was nearly 10 o'clock before I finally decided to turn on my phone. The screen exploded to life. A blinding barrage of notifications. 47 missed calls. Every single one from Vanessa. Then, I opened the texts. It was a frantic, cascading waterfall of digital hysteria. "Ellie, call me now. Where did you get that house? Why didn't you tell us? Patricia Montgomery posted pictures. Are you living there? We need to talk. Immediately I can explain about Christmas. It was a misunderstanding. A huge one. Eleanor, I'm your sister. For God's sake, pick up the phone." I read every single one, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. The naked panic, the staggering entitlement, the transparent, desperate greed. It was all there, laid bare in frantic block capitals. I put the phone down on the table, face down, and took another sip of my hot coffee. The ocean was calm today, the waves rolling in with a steady, unhurried rhythm. I decided I would let her simmer in her own frantic juice. For 3 full days, I let her calls go to voicemail. I let her texts go unanswered. I walked the winding paths of the estate, I explored the dusty corners of Margaret's library, and I had long, peaceful conversations with Mrs. Chen about what flowers to plant in the spring. I was building a new life, brick by brick, and the frantic, demanding noise from my old one seemed very, very far away. On the fourth morning, I decided it was time. I let the phone ring twice before answering, schooling my voice into a neutral, almost bored tone. Hello? Eleanor. Finally. My God. Vanessa's voice was a high-pitched shriek of relief, frustration, and accusation. I have been trying to reach you for days. Days. Why haven't you been answering your phone? I've been busy, I said calmly, taking a sip of tea. Busy? Busy with what? That palace Patricia posted pictures of. What is going on? You have to tell me. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to wait. It was Margaret's home, I said finally. She left it to me in her will. A sharp, shocked intake of breath on the other end of the line. She, what? The entire estate? Just to you? How much is it worth? The question was out before she could stop herself, raw and ugly. I'm not going to discuss the specifics of my inheritance with you, Vanessa. But, we're family, she sputtered, the familiar refrain. You should have told us. We could have helped you. You must be so overwhelmed. Really? I said, and for the first time, I let a sliver of ice coat my words. That's not the impression I got from your Christmas text. The line went quiet. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she scrambled for a new tactic. Oh, that. Ellie, that was a total, complete misunderstanding. Mom was just feeling so overwhelmed, you know how she gets, and she wanted something simple this year. It wasn't about you. I swear. The lie was so audacious, so insulting to my intelligence, it was almost breathtaking. I didn't call her on it. Not yet. Instead, I dangled the bait. I see, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. Well, perhaps you're right. Things have been complicated. I think we should talk about Margaret's assets and the future. Why don't you and Andrew come for dinner on Saturday night? The relief in her voice was a tidal wave. Yes. Of course. We'll be there. We can sort all of this out. We're family, after all. Oh, we'll sort it out, I thought as I hung up the phone, a grim sense of satisfaction settling over me. But not in the way you think. My next call was to Mrs. Chin. We're having guests for dinner on Saturday, I said. And I have a very specific menu in mind. The dinner was a carefully orchestrated piece of theater. Every detail, from the seating chart to the wine pairings, was designed with a single purpose. I met with Richard and Patricia beforehand to walk them through their roles. They were not just guests, they were my supporting cast in the final act. On Saturday evening, I stood in the foyer as Vanessa and Andrew's car crunched up the gravel driveway. They were 30 minutes late, a classic, petty power move. It was amusing to watch their expressions as they stepped inside. Their jaws went slack. They gawked at the soaring ceilings, the priceless art on the walls, the sheer, unapologetic scale of the place. Andrew, ever the appraiser, let out a low, covetous whistle. Vanessa was practically vibrating with a toxic cocktail of envy and avarice. I greeted them with a smile that didn't reach my eyes and led them into the drawing room, where my other guests were already enjoying cocktails. Vanessa, Andrew, you know Richard and his wife, of course. And this is my dear friend, Patricia Montgomery. And this is Harold Bennett. Vanessa's eyes widened at the mention of the former ambassador. She immediately turned on her high-wattage charm, while Andrew began trying to talk about the stock market with Harold. They were like amateur actors who had wandered onto a Broadway stage, completely out of their depth, and it was painfully obvious. We moved into the dining room, a magnificent space with a long mahogany table set with heirloom silver and sparkling crystal. The meal began. Each course, designed by me and executed to perfection by my chef, was a silent, edible metaphor. The appetizer was an elaborate, beautiful foam sculpture that was almost entirely hollow. The salad was a mix of exquisite but distinctly bitter greens. The main course, a perfectly seared filet mignon, was served artfully but was cold in the center. They didn't notice. They were too busy trying to impress my friends and, more importantly, trying to subtly, and then not so subtly, probe for the details of my new life. The conversation was a strategic dance, and for the first time in my life, I was the one leading. We talked about art, about philanthropy, about international travel. Vanessa and Andrew could only offer awkward, empty platitudes. Finally, Andrew, unable to restrain his greed any longer, turned to me with a greasy, ingratiating smile. "So, Eleanor," he began, "this is all quite impressive. With an estate this large, and all the responsibilities that come with it, you'll certainly need family to help you manage things. A lot of responsibility for one person to handle alone." It was the opening I had been waiting for. The cue for the curtain to rise on the final act. Before I could reply, Patricia, with the flawless timing of a seasoned diplomat, chimed in. Her voice was light, airy, and carried across the table. "Oh, I'm sure Eleanor will manage beautifully. After all, handling a $40 million inheritance is no small feat, but if anyone has the head for it, it's our Eleanor." Silence. A deep, profound silence fell over the table. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick Persian rug. Vanessa's fork clattered from her nerveless fingers onto her plate. Andrew's face went slack, a mask of disbelief and shock. 40 million. The number hung in the air between us, shimmering and obscene. Vanessa stared at me, her eyes wide with a furious, frantic calculation. 40 million, she whispered, the words barely audible. I just gave a slight, noncommittal shrug, taking a slow sip of my wine. This was Richard's cue. He cleared his throat, placing his linen napkin neatly on the table beside his plate. "Actually," he said, his voice calm and professional, "that brings up a point of business, if you'll all indulge me for a moment." He looked at me, a silent question. I gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He turned his full, professional, unassailable gaze on Vanessa and Andrew. As Eleanor's lawyer, I've been assisting her with the administration of Margaret Hamilton's estate. It has been, as you can imagine, a rather complex process. Andrew leaned forward, practically salivating, smelling an opportunity. Of course, of course. If there are any legal issues, any complications, we'd be happy to recommend. That won't be necessary, Richard cut in smoothly, his voice like silk-wrapped steel. He reached down and placed his sleek leather briefcase on the table, clicking it open. Eleanor's instructions have been exceptionally clear. In fact, we have just finalized her new last will and testament. Vanessa's head snapped toward him, her eyes narrowing. Her new will? Indeed, Richard said. He withdrew not the will itself, but a professionally bound, multi-page summary, its cover embossed with the name of his prestigious law firm. Eleanor felt that, in light of her new circumstances, it was prudent to formalize her wishes and ensure her considerable assets would be handled by those she trusts most, in the event of her own passing. He slid the document across the polished mahogany table. It glided silently, coming to a stop directly in front of Vanessa. It's all quite straightforward, he continued, his tone that of a man reading a weather report. A significant endowment to the city's art museum to create the new Margaret Hamilton wing, open to the public. A generous bequest to Mrs. Chen, here, in gratitude for her years of loyal and dedicated service. A fully funded, independently administered college and life starter trust for her niece, Emma Winters. He paused, letting the words sink in, watching as Andrew's face lit up with greedy anticipation. He thought this was just the preamble to their own multi-million-dollar windfall. And, Richard continued, his voice dropping just a fraction, for her sister, Vanessa Phillips, née Winters, the sum of $1,000.